Welcome to CESI Inside. In today's edition, we welcome Jan Willem. Jan Willem is Secretary General of the European Public Service Union. Together with CESI, we're a member of the so-called TUNE platform in the Social Dialogue Committee, Central Government Administrations. Jan Willem, welcome.
Thank you, Klaus. A pleasure to be here.
How do you experience the corona crisis professionally, also privately? And of course, it's always interesting to hear how other organizations are doing. How basically did EPSU, both internally and in relations to its members, adapt to the new situation? And how are you coming back, resuming your work?
Klaus, I see that all of us that try to manage an organization are preoccupied with similar questions. Actually, first on myself, I went into quarantine when I came back from a trip to meet our affiliates in Kazakhstan. And that was on the 11th of March. And I went in quarantine on the 12th. I was actually notified by the Kazakh authorities that I was on a plane where they had found somebody who was infected with Covid19, so which was infected by the virus and possibly had developed Covid19. So I went in quarantine, but the Monday thereafter, as you know, because I assume that also counted for CESI in Brussels, the Belgian authorities imposed the confinement measures, and our offices were closed and people were starting to work from home. And we're still basically working from home. We're coming slowly back to the office. There's always been a core of colleagues who came to the office for finance and other reasons, but we're now slowly coming back to the office. We have our own back to the office plan to ensure that we can keep social distancing, to have all the different measures in place that are necessary now. So that is happening. We also had to cancel a large number of meetings in this period, not just in Belgium, but we had a number of meetings scheduled in other countries, even though the confinement wasn't yet happening there. We still decided to cancel all the meetings. So that's one of our main preoccupations, is how we get back to physical meetings again after summer, and how we can do that. We possibly can talk about that later. In the meantime, we have started to organize some of our statutory meetings, as well as our more, how should I say, issue-orientated professional meetings, our professional networks online. And often and I've noticed that with other organizations as well, certainly in the beginning, like in March and April, with a higher attendance rate as well, which should tell us something as well, that people, if they don't have to travel maybe for 2 days, are prepared to join a platform for 2 hours or something. So we've organized quite a few of our statutory meetings, and last week we had our executive committee meeting as well, where we had to adopt our finance report and a number of other things which were important for our own work. Obviously, the main discussion was around how we as EPSU should respond to the COVID-19 crisis. I think in the work of many organizations, I think we're all seeing what is happening to our economy, the enormous impact the confinement measures have had on our economy. Within the ETUC, the European Trade Union Institute has estimated there's about 42 million workers on temporary, how do you call that, short-term unemployment schemes. In Belgium, we call that technical unemployment, and the gross-domestic product of a number of countries has dropped by percentages of between 5 and 10%. So that's quite significant, and for some countries even more, like the UK, even has had a bigger hit. So the long-term effects of that, also because governments are now trying to sustain the corporations, sustain the different sectors by also pumping money into the economy. The long-term effects of that will still be with us. One of the things, so that is, I think, what we are experiencing. One of the early things we concentrated on as EPSU, as you know, and maybe interesting for your hearers, a big group of our membership is in the health and social services, the people who work in hospitals. So in the beginning, we focused very much on trying to address the issue of personal protective equipment. We put a lot of pressure on the European Commission to make available what they now call the joint procurement initiatives. It's not that we're satisfied, but the Commission did respond to that pressure and did try to make it easier to buy personal protective equipment and make that available to more countries, which, as you know, in some countries was lacking for many of the workers in the sector. Very specifically, we focused also on the ensuring that the Commission did not forget the countries in the candidate countries. One of our affiliates in the healthcare sector in Kosovo and a number of others in the region reported to us that there was hardly any money available in these countries to buy personal protective equipment. So we put a bit of pressure on the Commission, who was responsible for the emergency aid, that also these countries got some funding, and that actually materialized quite quickly, and the Commission did make available some funding. And then I think, as you know, for also the national administration area and in other sectors, we also try to work with the employers to raise jointly some of our concerns through the social dialogue committees or other contacts we had with the employers of the issues which were important for our sectors.
Yeah, we have, just to come back to your first comments also, we have now decided yesterday to organize our Congress, as you mentioned, also the statutory meetings, which are necessary for EPSU. We have had also quite intense discussions yesterday and came to the conclusion that we will have a physical meeting for CESI in December, so the Congress will take place. You mentioned also the study of the ETUI and on the impact. What do you think? What will be the impacts on labor markets, maybe long-term impacts on labor markets, working conditions, and social protection? What is EPSU's, let's say, what are the fears there from you personally, but also from the organization EPSU?
Our concerns in terms of the labor market is that the unemployment, which is now short-term, could be becoming a longer-term unemployment. If one of the things we see in the work we do with companies is that that restructuring starts to take place. I think you and probably the listeners will be aware of what is happening in the airline industry, for example, with Lufthansa, who has announced drastic cuts of its staff. So these short-term unemployment with the restructuring which is coming in a number of sectors might have lasting effects and rising unemployment for a longer time. That is why we find it important that governments, but also the European Commission, through its now recovery plan for Europe, makes available funding to support the economies in the different countries. I think CESI probably as well, and we within the ETUC, we have been pushing for the Commission to adopt an ambitious plan. What's on the table is maybe not ambitious enough for the challenges which we are faced, which we all know are graver than in 2008, 2009, when we had the financial and economic and social crisis at that time. So really a massive need of investment and support for our economies is necessary. And that, of course, extends then also to our social protection systems, to build these, to take care of the unemployed, but also of many other groups in society. The other effect I think we have seen is that the pandemic has revealed that many of the platform workers, so the Ubers and the food delivery and so on, that many of these workers are not very much protected or have very little protection. And that is why we are continue to push for more social legislation to ensure that these workers also have protection. I think that's one of the things the crisis has also revealed. I think specific for public services, of course, many of our members have been on the front line. If they work in public administrations, then they had to deal and have to deal with all the different schemes, like we just talked about, temporary unemployment schemes. They had to work on preparing and developing and executing, implementing the schemes to help businesses, the support for the culture and entertainment sector, etc. So these workers were in the front line. I already referred to health and social services, care workers who were in the front line in elderly homes, in residential care, home care workers, often unprotected, and many of our members got infected. We just did a little survey internally, which showed that over 5 countries, for which we had more or less complete data, around 50 to 50,000 workers got infected. So in practice over Europe, that number must go to somewhere between 250,000 to 500,000 public service workers who got infected in all the different branches, and especially in health and care services, but not only. Also members who were involved in electricity, those of our members who had an interface with the public in electricity, in water, in sewage, actually. We've also seen infections there. Groups of our firefighters, ambulance drivers, and of course urban transport, also numbers of infections. So these workers in the front line, they might not be seeing a threat to their jobs immediately. They have actually all been working, or most of them have been working. But we do know that the municipalities, for example, and that's important for those countries where the municipalities also raise their own funding, have their own taxation systems, that the municipalities also lack income. They see their expenditure rising and their income decreasing, for example, because of tourism collapsing in some municipalities. And that's you can already predict that for us in public services, that the calls for austerity or measures to trim budgets will be quickly on our agenda. To give you one example, the Croatian unions in the public sector have been negotiating, I think a month ago or so, have been negotiating their a pay increase which was already promised to them, and how to implement it. And the government said, we're not going to do that because of all the budgetary problems we have. So that is already the first effect of the pandemic directly on pay and conditions. The Croatian unions had to accept a more, I think you call that, staggered increase of the pay increase, etc. Also, the bonus payments were on the line. So I think that will be an effect for public service workers, which will be coming, and obviously towards the end of this year and certainly in the next year, we will have lots of these discussions where organizations like ourselves, defending the interests of public service workers, will have a big role to play to prevent that we get the same austerity measures and everything that goes with it in 2021, 2022 back on our agenda. Also, that's the reason why we are why many organizations have also pointed out how austerity has actually had a negative impact on public services. And we know as public service unions, your members, our members, how austerity has actually led to cuts in healthcare, in elderly care, and we're now paying the price for it in high numbers of infected workers, and of course high numbers of infected people and the elderly, not to mention them, even seeing the human rights being denied because of the confinement, because of lack of protective equipment, etc.
I mean, you mentioned it earlier also that you members and our members, they have been in the front line for quite a while now, and we stand at 8 o'clock in the evening on our balconies in front of our doors and clap. But now with the crisis, with the economic and social crisis exacerbating probably very considerably, we fear also that sooner or later the public service and its workforce will be asked to pay its share. As you said, you mentioned the example from one of your trade unions. How? Because we have had already first internal debates, which I think are very crucial for us and our member organizations, because from being heroes, today's heroes, all of a sudden the workforce in the public sector may be finger pointed and said, look, they are earning, they have saved jobs or whatever. And that may actually, how could I say, lead to the opposite. And let's say this essentiality of the workforce in the public sector may have been maybe forgotten or after the crisis. How do you position yourselves? Also, it's not only in our understanding a short-term positioning, but also something where we have to anticipate a little bit what's coming. How does EPSU how could I say, anticipate these possible developments?
Yeah, well, thank you, Klaus. That's a very good point, because indeed many people applaud the work public service workers have been doing, especially in health and care, but also the bus drivers, train drivers, and all the other people involved in public transport, and obviously in retail, keeping our supermarkets, etc., going. How that sympathy for our members, the heroes of our day, how that can be sustained, and that we can make sure that we will not get a new wave of cuts in public funding, cuts also in wages or wage freezes again. We are hopeful that people will remember how important public services are, and that certainly will be what we want to remember people, and we will have to do more work around that, of course, but that is what we want to remember people of. How important the work of public service workers has been. Were it not for public service workers, then our societies would have collapsed clearly. And our utilities would not have been running, our health and our social care would not have functioned, and so on and so on. So for us, that is important, and you know, there's always been a lot of sympathy for public services and public service workers, and whenever the public has been asked in referenda or at local or even at national level, people don't want to see their public services privatized, for example. The referenda unions and other organizations have been able to organize to prevent privatization, have always been largely successful. So I think we can be optimistic that we that the sympathy of the people will be for public services, and that people will understand public services are important for us. But it obviously brings us back to what are the dominant forces in our society and how they play in this crisis. In Germany, I think one of the conservative leaders for Bayern has already, from the CSU, has already indicated that we need to go back to reforms and he didn't say with so much words spaarpolitiek, but that we already have to go back to the days of old. There, I think more people are now aware that we should use this moment to try to force more fundamental change. You see that still reflected in the program of the Commission. I think part of that message is understood at that level, that the focus remains on the Green Deal, for example. You see that the attention on addressing tax fraud is remaining within the Commission. The European Parliament just, I think today actually they will vote on setting up the special investigating and more permanent committee which will look at tax avoidance, etc. So I think we can also be confident that there is more support for what we call tax justice issues, that the rich, the corporations have to pay their fair share of taxation. The Commission actually has come forward with a proposal to tax large corporations in its plan, although without much specificities. So there I think there's a role for unions also to be involved, and as EPSU we try to do that also, for unions to be involved also in the battle for tax justice, working with other groups to be involved in the battle for making this transition to a more green and social economy, to ensure that there is just transition with it. So there I think we can be optimistic. Where I am concerned is more, and I know CESI also has members in Hungary. Where I'm more concerned is about the attitude of the authoritarian regimes like in Poland and in Hungary, who have used this crisis and the emergency regulations they adopted to try to deal to manage the spread of the virus and deal with the pandemic, where they have abused this to also take away trade union rights, like in Hungary for groups of public service workers, where they undermine the social dialogue in Poland. And that is where I'm more concerned for the future. And I think there we have to be very vigilant that our democracies are not undermined further by such governments.
Yeah, we had indeed yesterday also information. We were informed by our Hungarian trade unions was indeed going into this direction. For me, it's for us, it's quite important also that because what we've seen after the 2008-2009 crisis, I mean, the politicians, which is somehow from a human point of view understandable. You have your 4 years election period or your mandate, and in that time you have to proceed to cuts, which will certainly have to come after the crisis is over. Somebody will say we have to come back with austerity measures, and that the first place, of course, people can cut, or the easiest place people can cut is in the public sector and its workforce. So we're really going there into the same direction as EPSU, that we have to make sure, I think, that beyond the crisis, also investment into, let's say, the essential basis of our societies in the public sector continues. You spoke about also what EPSU has been doing in the past. I think this crisis, we feel it, although we have been working from home, that we are quite important for member organizations. And I think the affiliates of our member organizations, they're very much, how could I say, they see the importance, the fundamental importance now of trade unions, in particular, particularly in this situation. What do you think? Will this with this last? The importance of trade unions, will it pay off in additional membership in the future?
That yet again is one of the questions we will have to see, where we will have to see the answer to. Some of our affiliates have reported an increase in membership, logically, because the trade unions are very visible at these moments at the workplace. Think of the health and safety measures that need to be taken by the employers, and especially in the absence of health and safety measures. I mean, who will stand up for workers? That's the trade unions, and our members and the shop stewards, the trade union activists, the trade union officers. They have been over the last, certainly in the first month and a half, they have been working day and night to ensure that workers are protected, that health and safety protocols are available. Some of our members have also, and that's also in April and even in early May, have also used the right to withdraw their labor if the employer could not provide a safe working place, because that's the responsibility of the employer. And it's the trade unions that can organize such counterforce to the employer, organize the force of our argument, use the argument of force for our arguments to ensure that the employer lives up to his or her responsibilities. But also at sector level and at national level, like we at European level, the unions have also been very active to ensure that funding became available. The short-term unemployment schemes were developed at European level, that this SURE program was developed and funded, and we hope that will be further approved also tomorrow in the European Council. So I think it has shown that the trade unions are an essential part of our economy and have the capacity to ensure that the interests of our members, of workers, are taken into account. I mean, nobody else has been doing that. It's also the trade unions who are the ones who point out, like in a number of countries, the negative impact there has been on the Black and ethnic minority communities, where workers and members of these communities were even more impacted. It's the trade unions who mobilized also to ensure that the Commission kept the Gender Pay Transparency Directive on the agenda when there were rumors that the Commission wanted to postpone that. You know, the employers are not in favor. And it has been trade unions who kept that on the table for our members in public services, and especially in health and care. This is of fundamental importance. I mean, many in health and certainly in care, elderly care, home care, these services are 80-90% provided by women, often in low-paid positions, in precarious jobs. So this directive was important, is important to get off the ground, to ensure that these workers and those women get their fair payment. So for us, that will certainly be also a direction we will have to pressure in the future. I think in the end, we all know that we need to mobilize, we need to be organizing for action, because nothing will be given to us and to our members, and I do foresee that we will see more trade union action, and I hope more joint trade union action across borders, across sectors, to support our arguments. One of the things we looked at back is in the period 2018-2020, so just before the pandemic started, just before the confinement measures were put into place, we recorded more than 100 strikes and demonstrations in health and social services across Europe. In some countries a little bit more than others, but almost all countries had demonstrations and actions, strikes during that period. And of course, that's how should you say, that's a story. How do you say in English? A story foretold, a story announced, no? Because what did the unions ask? They wanted better paying conditions to attract more people. They pointed out the shortages in staff and the lack of funding, and how that undermined the quality care. And this week, you have seen there were actions in France, in Belgium, in Greece, and in Italy of care workers and health and care workers. Again, demonstrations, local and regional strikes. So I think that is going to continue. Those workers will remember what they went through and the lack of materials they had, and they will not forget. And I think we can, for the moment, count on sympathy of the public that these workers deserve better pay and conditions.
Yeah, a long way for us, for you to go, for us to go. And in this sense, Jan Willem, a final message to the CESI community?
Not directly. I think your members face the same challenges we do, and it is important that we work in the same direction to the extent we can work together. I know we are with CESI looking at what we can do in the central government administration social dialogue, for example. I think our core demands for more investment and funding for public services, tax justice, the green and social deal, ensuring that collective bargaining, trade union rights are strengthened and not weakened in the aftermath of this crisis. And last but not least, I think important is that to all this public money which is now being poured into corporations, that there are some conditionalities, and I think that is probably a very short-term message I have for our members, for your members. We don't want that this money goes into the pockets of shareholders who then pay out dividends, that it goes into in high executive bonuses for chief executive officers of companies who avoid paying their taxes or who avoid having a collective agreement. Yeah, I think now is the moment to make sure that the people of Europe get something back for their tax money in terms of better social foundation of our societies for the future. In EPSU, we say the people and our planet before profits, to capture in a bit slogan-esque way, but in essence, that's what we stand for. No, I wish you all a lot of success in your work, and a pleasure to be discussing with you, Klaus.
Thanks a lot, Jan Willem. Thanks a lot for the good cooperation. Take care of yourself, take care of your stuff, and see you soon, hopefully in person.
Bye-bye.